welcome to the Ops Show. I'm excited, Tristan.
What's up, everyone? Hi, Kyle. We're here at the Ops Show, where weekly we're going to bring you the trials and tribulations, collaborations, and automations from the world of DevOps. Now, we're going to go through a specific format week over week to help you stay on top of everything that you need to up your developer game. We're going to first get into a little bit of the DevOps drop, thinking about all the product releases, things that are happening on the ops platform that you could take advantage of to work on workflow automation. We're going to go into this week in DevOps. We're going to look at some of the news that's being shared out there and see how we can best break it down so that it's in bite-sized chunks and you can take it back to your work on a daily basis. And then we're going to bring in amazing guests from the DevOps industry, everyone from speakers and authors to some of our very own CTO.ai team, and maybe do some pair programming, maybe do some user groups, who knows? But we're going to get a little bit of all that good stuff on a weekly basis to you here on the DevOps Show.
I love this. I think a big part of this is also doubling down on the growing number of people who've joined the ops community in our Slack channel. And so I think a big part of this is we're going to be calling out in that channel and looking for people to share and ask questions, maybe, post some things in the news channel and we'll comment on them, ask questions, or maybe even if you're dealing with a problem, a blocker, how do I, we could tackle that stuff live every Friday at 1 p.m. We're obviously doing this one recorded today as a way to test it out in the first show, but I think part of the goal, correct me if I'm wrong here, Tristan, but we're going to go live in the future here.
Yeah, we're going to do this completely live every week. Maybe a little scary, but it's going to be a fun time. And I think the more, like you said, if we can get some live interaction from some of the audience and solve problems right here and now, all the better for everyone involved. So looking forward to that.
I like it. Nothing like live troubleshooting. Cool. Well, why don't you kick us off? What's the first step today?
Yeah, so like you said, we've run a very active community called the Ops Community on Slack. We'll drop a link into the description here so that you can follow us back there and engage us on a daily basis if you need a little bit more DevOps exposure than weekly. And let's talk a little bit about what's happening on the platform front. CTO.ai, we run something called the Ops platform that helps you with developer automations inside Slack. And we've knocked out, I think, some interesting things recently. Kubernetes blog post that goes deep into how to use Kubernetes and also how to automate Kubernetes. We also have a lot of other videos that we've been dropping from some of Kyle's keynotes that have been happening over the past few months pre-COVID, from London, San Francisco, Vegas, and what else do we got, Kyle? What else is
let's touch on that a minute. Recently? Whoa, we got our intro video. Yeah, this one's actually a really cool one, so maybe we should just call this one out because I'm excited about this one personally. We haven't quite released this yet, but we're going to post it out on our YouTube channel. Heck, maybe starting after this show. There's a talk that I did at the London Cloud Expo last month, I think it was now. And the talk was called How to Build a Culture of Delivery Using Lean DevOps. It's not a particularly technical talk, but it talks a lot about the ideology aspect of DevOps. We shared that early on with a bunch of our new community members because obviously we try to share that out to them first. But now also, I think it's great that we'll put that on our YouTube. It's about a 27 minute video that just covers sort of an end-to-end view of what it means to build a lean DevOps practice. So I definitely think we should share that one as well. And then, I mean, there's
and
just
what is lean, in a bite-sized format, what does lean DevOps mean to you guys?
Yeah. I mean, I obviously talk about it more on that talk, but the gist is, there's a lot of companies, there's a lot of people out there who look at DevOps and they say, oh, silver bullet, I'm going to hire me a DevOps. And they think DevOps is tools. They think it's technology and Kubernetes. And I think what is really clear to me, or at least the way I interpret DevOps from experts like AWS on the subject, is it's best practices, ideology, process, and then tools, which allow a company to ship software at a faster process. But to me, the thing that's not emphasized when we talk about DevOps is the ideology about how to enable your team members to move faster using technology and using best practices. And it's almost that technology is the end, where really technology is the means to the end. So how do you build tools and a developer experience that leads the developer to a place where they're able to ship software faster? And I think that's sort of a bit of a contrarian view sometimes. But the more we see technologies like Kubernetes come out and thought leaders start to emerge in this space, the more we're starting to really understand that DevOps is not just about technology. And in fact, a lot of times technology makes it harder for developers to be successful. So that's kind of what the talk's about. I just talk about a lot of these challenges, talk about the idea of adopting DevOps over time, talking about taking a lean approach to DevOps, because it's not a silver bullet, and it's something that you need to adopt over time. And the tactics you use early might be different than the tactics you use later. But much of the thought leadership that comes out in DevOps is really about the learnings that happen in large organizations and the tools that are used in large organizations. When we try to apply those to smaller organizations, it's a bit of a mix mash. So it's trying to re-empower those smaller organizations to think a little bit critically about this trend of DevOps, and bring their sort of objective and critical initiative into thinking about how do they enable their engineers. And one of the easiest ways to enable your team is to just keep things simple.
Yeah, just very much like lean startup methodology. Move quickly, move fast, and be able to iterate as you go.
For sure, that's exactly how I think about it. So anyway, I won't give too much about it, but I'm actually gonna put the video live right now while we're talking, and that way it'll be available for everybody who wants to check it out, and anytime after this video goes live as well.
Amazing.
Cool. So what's up next?
Yeah. So I guess another interesting thing to call out is some of the open source drops that CTO has been doing with some of our automations from the Ops platform.
Yeah, that's stuff that I'm actually really excited about, and you can also find out more about that on our blog. So I'll just bring a quick view up on that. So obviously we talked a little bit about the Kubernetes stuff and how you can use the Ops platform you're going Kubernetes, but a really big and exciting set of announcements was not just that we announced new SDKs for Python, Go, and Bash with Rust coming soon. It's also that we open sourced a big chunk of the Ops platform, because we think right now, more than anything, to fulfill our mission of making DevOps accessible, the best way to do that for our community and all of the different developers out there is to open source more of the platform. So this blog post goes on to say about how we open sourced our CLI, and we also open sourced all of our SDKs, and we also open sourced about 10 different examples, with more coming soon. We followed up by open sourcing not just a generic Kubernetes op, but specifically workflows that work with EKS and GCP or GKE as well. And so not only is there sort of a generic Kubernetes approach that we've put out there in the open source piece here, there's also vendor-specific ones, and we have Azure coming soon. And all of this can be found on our GitHub profile at CTO.ai. You can see here it's all open source. And no shortage of emojis playing into this, because it's great to keep DevOps fun. Like we always say, when a team ships together, they stay together.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what is your, looking at this and thinking about open source and why open source, what's your OS philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, for us, and the way that I've built open source approaches is I've done sort of pure open source before, where I've worked with different pure open source projects. Like, I've involved in things like Feathers, and I was involved in Node.js and MooTools in the early days, and that stuff's good, but it's hard to balance it with the idea of like building a business. And sometimes building a business is one of the most powerful ways you can support an open source movement, because now you have a set of aligned corporate interests to invest into that. And so when I think about open source in this day and age and how we can approach it as a business, what we think about is more like, how do we open up all the edges, and how do we make our contribution to that developer experience sort of the raw computes, as well as sometimes the orchestration. This is commonly thought of as not open core, but rather open integration or open edges. And what it does is it allows you to have sort of a sustainable business model, because there's something at the center of it that's sort of proprietary to what you're doing. And for us, that's sort of the idea of running an op via Slack on top of our Kubernetes cluster, where we essentially, at some point, I'm sure we'll have a paid model associated with that, but we're in beta right now and really focus on supporting the community. But like in the future, we can have a viable business model there where we're basically selling the computes to run these things, as well as the overhead around configuration and team management, some of these enterprise features. That means we can have a healthy, vibrant community where our developers are able to use the CLI for free. They're able to contribute to the registry for free. They're able to get started with some of the Slack tooling. And only once they break into like sort of more extreme business cases is there sort of an aspiration for us to start collecting money. And that means that we can subsidize some of that cultivation and open source within our business model, because our business model is really about a bottom-up adoption of developers implementing the tools that they believe are the best tools. And we think that's contrarian to how it used to work, where more it was like push top down, especially in larger organizations. So we're trying to empower developers to bring tools into their company. By making DevOps accessible, it means that these developers can more customize their experience. And frankly, I've been building software for about 20 years, and I think it's, the developer experience, is something that we haven't invested into enough. And the more we can make it a pleasant experience, the more we're going to enjoy our work. And now more than ever, it's important that we have and we can revisit the benefits of things like a ChatOps approach or a chat-first approach to serverless DevOps, because, remote is here to stay. And why not bring our developer tools to the place that communication and collaboration happens, especially if we don't have to take on the huge upfront investment of implementing a chat-based solution, and we don't have to deal with the compromises of also being able to run those workflows in the command line. And that's where we've tried to really bring our vision of what DevOps could look like to the market and to the community. Because I think, when you build an op and it instantly runs in the CLI, but it also instantly runs in Slack, now you don't have to compromise. You can get up and running and build your own custom experience in 90 seconds. And that's empowering, I think, for developers and puts them in the driver's seat of shaping what the developer tool stack is going to look like in the future.
Yeah. I think it's, a very interesting time for collaboration and talking about how remote work is here to stay. And also, a lot of people won't go back to offices going forward. A lot of people are going to stay working remote. A lot of people are going to completely remove that fixed cost of real estate. And so it's going to change a lot of things. And with it, work will change. So with that, let's go to the nice segue into what's happening this week in DevOps. And I think we were looking at a Forbes article that you were mentioned in, looking at the effects of engineering teams and the transition to remote and what's happening now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it really just kind of speaks to a lot of the things I was just describing. And the things I was just describing are all sort of driven from this move to remote. And I think what we're seeing from companies that are coming and talking to us, and what we're also seeing from developers, is that there's a whole new set of rules, right? And to enable a software developer in a co-located office environment had a different set of rules, because you could just go over to their desk and you could pair program on the same keyboard and solve these things. But now there's this more mainstream movement now to remote as a result of COVID, and we expect that to continue to be the new normal. There's a different set of tactics, and what we're hearing, which is we're still shaking this out and understanding, but what's seemingly changing in the world of DevOps is the idea of transparency and observability and accessibility of tooling. And I think at the root of this, there's sort of this dichotomy of enablement versus trust, or accountability versus trust. And we've always had these discussions with engineering managers about finding that balance. You can't have ultimate autonomy and trust, and you can't have, so much accountability that like there's no creative process. So I think what companies are really struggling with and trying to figure out is how to enable that observability into the software development process. And it's not a matter of like looking at an individual and are they working or not. I think if somebody's looking at it like that, then they kind of have their priorities mixed up. You shouldn't need to analyze Git commits to figure out if somebody's doing their job. But there is this question of like, when are things being deployed? When are things being QA'd, or is it ready for review? It's more of this cross-functional, both within the engineering teams and squads, but also like interdependent with like project management or other teams. But there's this question of like communication and cross-collaborative communication that's really emerging. And I think as a result, like the de facto tools we've used in the past, it's challenging to find the right balance of that. And as a result of the SaaS ecosystem, we sort of outsourced all these micro solutions to different vendors, and some of them are more biased for project management. Some of them are more biased for developers. Others are only accessible by sysadmins. And I think what that's doing is it's like really highlighting all of the information silos that exist in businesses, which are slowing them down and ultimately contributing to what we think of is in the Stripe coefficient reports as 300 billion every year in developer productivity that's lost. So in thinking through that, that's what
300 billion.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the Stripe coefficient says, which is a really great report. I mean, I think there's a couple really great reports on this topic that I would encourage people to look up, and I'll just try to pull this up on my screen. Coefficient. The Stripe coefficient is a report that Stripe did where they went out and they surveyed tons of developers, tons. And they came back to qualify that there's $300 billion opportunity for businesses. And, there's great quotes in here, like access to developers is a bigger threat to business than access to capital. Like stop and think about that for a minute. How empowered are developers by that statement? But it's a result of companies wasting 300 billion of developer productivity every year. And a lot of this, we theorize is a factor of like some of the tools that you're using within your development process, right? They're more complicated. They're harder to be successful with. But I think it's also now obviously a measure of how we are communicating as an organization. And when people are interdependent, marketing needs something from development needs something from project management. It's like, how does that work? So I think, what we've really been seeing is there's this core move to tools, things like serverless, that are going to lower the cost of maintaining systems, because the alternative, like a more complex and custom system, you have more horsepower and more control, but you also have more overhead and cost to manage, which is obviously a challenge. But then also there's this move towards observability and contextualization that enables cross-functional communication, and more importantly, gives developers autonomy to work relatively independently, or groups to work independently, but we have a shared set of KPIs that our goals are. And this is where things
Siri,
like,
I'm having
oh,
trouble
hi
hearing
Siri.
you.
This is where things like DORA metrics start to come into the mix, where they're more prevalent in larger organizations. In a small organization, you might think of it more like a delivery metric, but it's a set of KPIs that a team can kind of agree on around, okay, what is our working cadence? How are we trying to deliver software? At what pace? At what checkpoints am I looking for stop gaps? And there's a lot of really smart people, hopefully some of which we'll bring onto this show later on, who have a lot of clear knowledge in this space. And I absolutely see a trend in that direction. I was on a panel this morning with Mick Kirsten from TaskTop, great guy, CEO over and founder of TaskTop, who's written books on this subject. I mean, Mick has his PhD from UBC. He's probably one of the smartest people on this subject. And Mick was really laying it out for this group of investors that we were talking about how important this is. And I think what we're seeing is like that has been a trend that was already on the move in larger organizations over the last year or two or three. Things like value stream mapping and DORA metrics are really playing into that digital transformation. But now what's happening is that's almost accelerating into an earlier stage where now every business going remote has to go through some sort of digital transformation, as small as it might be, to reevaluate how they think about enabling their developers.
Yeah. And, obviously OKRs and metrics and being able to track and your progress and over a specified amount of time is always been incredibly important. Well, I'm curious. I know you're a tool freak, and you love to use all the latest remote apps and software. And we use quite a bit of them at CTO.ai. What are some of your favorite remote technologies that you've been taking advantage of with this transition to just a completely distributed team at your company?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many. I mean, Slack is obviously at the center of this. It's obviously one of those things where it can be overwhelming at times how much information comes in at Slack. So you got to really think that through. But I've been really enjoying that, and more, Slack is the center of my world over email when it comes to communication. Zoom,
With
Zoom is
12,
really important.
12 million now
I think
daily
it's up to 13
actives.
million, something like that now. Yeah,
Is
I mean, they're growing super
Have they
quick.
announced the new daily actives yet?
I don't know.
I don't want. Could it be even higher?
Yeah, I don't want to miscite it. I know there's some rivalry out there in the market about it, but I know that they've said, Stuart's been on the news quite a bit on some of the money channels, and he's also been tweeting different things. And I know they're growing, and they've seen an immense amount of growth as a result of this switch. So I think more and more.
His Twitter feeds have been very interesting to read and watch as. He's done some tweet storms that have really been super transparent about where the Slack marketplace has been going, and how many every day they're breaking records of active usership. So it's been pretty wild to watch that progress.
Absolutely. And I think that just highlights, the macro trend. And so I'd even start there. It's like that is the macro trend around communication. But I think this sort of the same premises, the things that people are looking for, are starting to permeate down through the rest of the tool stack. And so one of the tools that we use, which I'll also give a shout out to, somebody in our community, TJ Holowaychuk, he's about to, or maybe just has started releasing this. And this one really hits the nail on the head too. We really love tools like this. So TJ has this sort of, I don't know if I'd call it a startup. He doesn't really call it a startup. He calls himself an indie developer, because he's an independent developer who builds all these technologies through this brand called Apex, where he has logs, or he has these existing products called Ping, which we use, Up, which is really good for managing serverless APIs, and now he's just come up with this new thing called Logs. And what TJ is really well known for is thinking through the developer experience, making it intuitive, but also just this beautiful minimal design. And so he's come up with this new logging tool that's really, really powerful. And you can see from the visualization just how much information you can fit on that. And that's really important, I think, for a developer experience, because you can kind of like load it all into your brain and get a visual and then drill in. And essentially you can start drilling into all these different logs while also getting information on the side. And he's got filtering and some stuff. So it's almost like an alternative to Kibana, but I believe it's for CloudWatch logs. So it's an alternative interface to your CloudWatch logs, and he's come out with an early access beta here, which I highly encourage people to sign up for, but also check out his other products. And going back to like business model and open source, TJ's one of those prolific developers who's contributed so much to the open source world. He's created Express, he's created Koa. Heck, it's hard to list all. There's 500 or so packages that are personally like instrumental to my development as a developer that he's released. But now what he's done with Apex is he's found this really interesting and beautiful balance of offering these tools for free in the open source, but then having a certain subset of features which there's sort of a premium license for. And I think what that does is it's really shows how open source and the need to make money to fund open source and pay for our personal life, how we're starting to find that balance. And I think I'm really excited to see it, because the approach that had been using was everything was pure open source, and then Amazon would go pick it up and sell it as a service, and that was really hard. There was a lot of drama there. And it's also hard to be a completely for-profit business and speak to the needs of developers who need to be able to get in and tinker with the source code and want to be able to contribute. But this is one thing that I saw, I think this week on my Twitter feed, or last week on my Twitter feed, that he was talking about this. And as far as like a this week in DevOps, this is one of the things that I'm the most excited about, because we get a ton of value out of the tools that he creates.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And being able to highlight someone who is so active in the open source community and providing these options for people to get in there and utilize without having to pay a steep entry price, I think is incredibly important. Absolutely. Especially in the developer community.
Absolutely. I agree with that completely. So yeah, there's probably some other things worth touching on too. And you mentioned that Forbes article. That Forbes article is pretty macro. It's sort of a broad contribution of like, what does the world look like as we're moving forward? I contributed it, so obviously I'm biased. But there's some other really exciting things that have happened recently. One of them is actually McKirsten, who I'll call it again. He was mentioning that they just launched a brand new product called TaskTop Viz, which is being used to do value stream assessments in larger organizations. So that's really good. And then, we're obviously keeping a keen eye on everything that's going on within the Kubernetes community and some of the changes I have in KubeCon. And I think we'll have some cool stuff that we can surface and talk about there next week as we start to see what the world looks like.
Yeah, it's at some points changing so rapidly and other points changing so slow all at the same time in this environment. But we're looking forward to having more guests, more news, and a lot more DevOps drops for everyone in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I'd love to put it out there and see if there's people that you'd love to see us have on the show. Hey, everyone in the community, anyone who's watching this, share that with us. Get us connected. Make an intro to Tristan or I. We'd love to get some other people on here who are knowledgeable. And I think you have a few things in the works coming up as well, where we get some.
Yeah, definitely. People. So yeah, we'll drop all the links that we mentioned in the description. And please, in the comments, or reach out directly, either on Twitter, email, or on the CTO.ai website. We'll be here and taking suggestions for guests, suggestions for news, topics, tech stack, competitions, anything. We're open to whatever would be helpful for you in your DevOps journey.
Yeah, I'm thinking about doing a bit of a live coding session, maybe like a 12-hour hackathon of just like locking in and building some stuff, because there's no better way to get excited about software than to just lock it in for a binge session. So I'm excited about this. This is going to be fun, and I can't stress enough to people, definitely come and check out the Ops community. You can just find it from the community link on our website, submit the form. Tristan and I, as well as our whole team, will be in there to welcome you, and that's where we're going to be dropping a lot of our content first. And we've got a lot of cool stuff coming up to touch on sort of this whole welcome to DevOps, because a lot of the people who are joining the community are pretty new, and they're coming because they want to learn things. So our idea here is we can really help facilitate and accelerate some of that learning by sharing our knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And yeah, exactly like Kyle said, a lot of the content and the topics and thoughts is being shared all throughout the week in the Slack community. So it's a great place if you want to be a part of that on a daily basis. Cool. Well, with that, on the next episode from my parents' basement, the Ops Show, we'll have a lot more for you. So excited to see you next week.
This is going to be fun. Looking forward to this.